Is it working? Can you hear that?
Yes.
Okay, okay, thank you. There. We'll let people get on and we'll be starting in just a few minutes here.
Okay, Sven, you don't need that to stand on to be able to get it.
Yeah, I do actually.
I wasn't nice with it. No. Okay, I didn't know if you're on.
Yep, just, yeah, just use one of those and you should be able to get it going. Yeah, this thing feels tippy.
That's why. This is, what do you got? Worth more than. Did you write down the codes for me?
Oh, hell no.
Let's see. And that microphone is going to be working for two speakers that are behind you on each side of the room here.
Where is this? Oh, how do I get the flash drive? I don't want to mess with what you got going on. If you can just pull open the folder and I'll get it.
Oh, yeah? How the hell?
It said it went in. I just got to find the folder.
He's going to hit share screen.
Right here, yeah. No, I gotta bring it up first.
Yeah, I got to try to find the.
Right.
Not even this out of the way. I'm used to a Mac.
So here's like that.
Right.
You can also do touch screen.
Is there a folder that I can just click on?
Right down here to the.
There we go. Yeah, because then that'll show.
Yeah.
That should show the options here. So. Boom, there we go. That's what I was looking for.
Yeah.
Okay. Now I just got.
I know it's not.
Not yet. It will be. Remember what I called it. It's the next part.
Oh, yeah, wait a minute. I was gonna find my email and we get it off of that.
Sometimes my email works.
Oh, there we go.
Found her?
Boom.
All
Yep.
right, good. Because I'm kind of illiterate.
Stan?
Well, we all become that. Everything moves so fast that it's easy to.
Something that I found when I use jump drives for somebody, I name my jump drive an obvious name, like your name or something real obvious.
Yeah, no, I knew where to. I just needed to find the spot where.
But I mean, that's where I find it's the easiest way to, when I plug it in, somebody has a whole bunch of files in them. It makes it easier for me to find.
Okay, so I got it up. So then whatever you guys got to do to broadcaster.
Okay, so this is Ken, so he'll be obviously running our stuff, and then Leroy is our president, so he'll be running the meeting, if you will, so. Give a pocket, take care of that.
Thank you.
Now my phone's locking up in here.
All right, move back here to. You want is the meeting ID what you need?
I'll need the. I need that first.
858 9830 4452. What? There, okay, I finally found it. I just was.
I can't get this camera to come up. It's not allowing access to camera.
All right. Well, we'll just start the meeting. Oh, it's kind of nice thing. Show the Zoom people. People are here. All right. Hello. Like that. Oh, I did that once. The light's red now. Oh, look here. It's working now. Welcome, everyone. Glad y'all could make it. We also got an audience on Zoom. And without further ado, we're going to get it started. We're doing it a little different this week, this month, because our speaker Sven needs to get back to the cities. So we're going to start with him. So I'm going to turn it over right now to Bridget, who has lined up all our programs for the year, and she is going to do some introduction.
All right, so this evening we have a very special guest. So Sven Sundgarrd, who you should be able to hear him, and especially if you get up early in the mornings. on Minnesota Public Radio, but he'll talk more about what he's doing, what he's up to. But today he's going to be talking to us about climate change. And I've heard part of this presentation before, so he has updated it. And he's going to talk a little bit about why we are still freezing. So please welcome Sven. Actually, it's more why can't we do it? That's what we're concerned about.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm just excited for the period here. Not long from now, we will be complaining about the heat. Yes, you can't make anybody happy. Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me. Thank you for sort of rearranging the schedule because yeah, I did get out pretty early. Oh, this one.
Yeah.
Hello, everybody over there. I'm trying to remember you guys are here.
What was I saying?
Oh, yeah, I got up pretty early to do the radio, so I got to drive all the way back to Minneapolis. So, hopefully there isn't the traffic that I had on the way here.
Well, you probably got adjusted for my height. There you go.
See,
As I said, we brought the chair out here for you.
This chair initially, you said you don't need to stand on it. Actually, just like TV all over again. So yeah, I do Minnesota Public Radio now. I also bring you the news where I do daily video content. So where I'm able to go more in depth with weather forecasts. I like to talk. I'm a stats geek, so I like to talk about stats. And every day there's a new climate change thing to talk about.
Now, if I click away from this, it's not going to do anything, is it? So I can pull up this. All right.
Yeah,
Because I'm still up there.
all right. So some of the first things to talk about are some recent climate headlines. Every day, every week, there's something new going on with not just climate change, but our day-to-day weather and climate patterns. As we've been talking about, it's a pretty cold April. We're going to explain a little bit about why and what we can expect soon. And yeah, why we're going to turn around probably to pretty rapid warming.
There we go.
Thank you.
People remember back to 2018. I know anything before 2020 seems like 20 years ago now. So it's hard to remember. But yeah, remember 2018, fourth coldest April ever, 2 blizzards. Some had 3 if you're lucky. And then we went to the 7th hottest May. So, you know, we joke around here that, you know, there is no spring in Minnesota, Wisconsin. We go from winter to summer. That year we actually did. Statistically, we went from an average March to an average June. It was 100 degrees on Memorial Day. Hopefully we don't see quite that extreme this year. We could be in for what looks like another hot summer. But so far this spring, it's been wet, you know, and after the drought of last year, that's what I keep telling myself when I keep waking up and it's cloudy, cold, and dreary. At least we're getting rid of the drought, right? At least we're getting rid of the drought. Almost 6 inches of precip so far since March 1st, which is the start of meteorological spring. Normal to this point is just over 4.5 inches. And this doesn't include the rain that we're going to get a little bit tonight. And then especially this weekend, there's the possibility of an inch of precip. So already it's the wettest spring we've had in 8 years. And again, what makes that more remarkable is just how dry it was last summer. We've had more precipitation without this weekend's rain this month of April in 3.5 weeks than we had all of June and July last summer. So think of that. And those are months that normally are wetter than April. You know, we think of April showers, April flowers, but actually our wettest month of the year is June. And so that, and of course, anything April through July is super important.
June is when
the growing season. Yeah, you want to make hay in June, make hay when the sun shines. We get sun ever. And yeah, if we get 1.35 inches total precip tonight and this weekend, probably not likely, but it's possible. That would put us at a point where we'd be the wettest in 21 years. We have to go back to 2001 for the spring. So again, it's all good because we've erased pretty much the drought across much of Minnesota, western Wisconsin. But also, when we look at
separate from the drought, which looks at more the moisture of the soil, but looking at the deficit we had from last year, we ended 2021 with 5 inches below normal, which is a large chunk. That's about almost a fifth of our annual average precipitation. And so we've cut that in half just by this spring. So if we can keep this up, we're sitting good. Because of course, you don't want it to just stop again in June or July, because that completely erases everything we've done this spring. Spring-wise, it's been 3.5 degrees cooler than normal. Much of that, of course, has been this month. March was only about 1 degree below normal, but April is running 5-6 degrees colder than average, which is significant. Talk statistics, we talk about standard deviation. This is more than 1 standard deviation below normal. So that's when it starts to become a significant thing. It's in the top quarter of cold Aprils, nowhere near a top 10, 15, or 20. So we at least have that. This is nothing like 2018. Comparable to 2013, which was another snowy April. We're below normal for April snowfall though. So we got that going for us. We've had frequent snow showers, but the actual accumulated snowfall is below normal. Here you go. Northern Minnesota though, no way. 2 to 4 times normal snowfall. Somebody I follow in Grand Marais, he just posted a picture today. He was posting something about going to his mailbox, not the snow, but all I could see behind it was how it was, a past knee-high snow still. Like, you think it's been bad here. We've only had 5 days above 60, which normal to date, we should have triple that amount. So anyway, just basically confirming what we all know. It's been cold. So who's responsible? Canada, for one. We've got 2 things going on this winter. One has been a La Nina pattern, which tends to be a little cooler for us in the winter months. And because we're displaying here, the overall pattern happens to be a big blocking high in the North Pacific. So Western Alaska tends to be warmer. And then we are pretty cold for basically the Rockies everywhere east of that, in the central part of the country. And then it gets pretty wet in the south. That's the overall pattern. Now, the reason that happens, without going into too much detail, we can talk just about these 2 slides for an hour in itself. But I'm guessing you guys don't all need a meteorology degree tonight. But what happens, you hear more about El Nino, because that one has bigger impacts on our weather, especially the winter. We have very mild winters. El Nino has a bigger impact on our winter climate than La Nina. La Ninas tend to be, basically a 60-40 correlation, meaning 60% of La Nina winters are cooler than normal, but 40% are average to above. So it's not a strong correlation, whereas El Nino, when we have an El Nino, we know 80% of the time we have a mild winter in Minnesota. And it has impacts throughout the year, and it affects the West Coast with more precipitation, all sorts of other big effects for the United States. But La Nina, the biggest impact usually is in winter months for us, tends to be a little cooler. And what happens is, instead of warm waters off the coast of West Coast of South America, which is El Nino, the warm waters on the opposite side of the Pacific, so the Western Pacific. And that matters because wherever the water's warmest, you have the most thunderstorms, and what goes up must come down, and that air collects at the surface in the Eastern Pacific. So that's what creates that persistent blocking high, which pushes the jet stream north. And when it's north, the purple line there, we're just basically funneling cold pretty routinely. And so this was a pretty typical winter, sort of a textbook winter for La Nina, in that it wasn't extremely cold, but we were persistently cool. So we didn't have extremes really this winter. We weren't sub-zero for several days on it. It was just that it seemed like it was persistently cold. It was basically right around the turn of the year. December was wild. Of course, we had tornadoes in mid-December, first ever. All sorts of crazy weather then, but then, of course, it shifted. And a lot of people noticed it's also been windy. Right around the time that pattern changed, each month this year has been windier than normal. January, February, March, and April. And April actually has been the windiest compared to normal. So we're not just crazy. Well, some of us might be, but it has definitely been really windy this month. And something like 6 days this month of over 50-mile-an-hour wind gusts too. And that's not from thunderstorms. That's just
windy days, which is insane, because we issue a severe thunderstorm warning, we get 60-mile-an-hour gusts. And we had one of those. MSP Airport had 2 days this month of ground stop because of the winds, not because of a blizzard. Pick your poison. So what's going to influence the weather this spring is the polar vortex. This was not a polar vortex winter. We kind of stretched the polar vortex, and you can imagine you've got a low of cold air trapped at the pole. The polar vortex isn't some new invention. You know, about 10 years ago, remember that winter of 2013, 14, all of a sudden some producer at a TV station somewhere got wind of this and thought, oh yeah, this sounds fun, polar vortex. And so all of a sudden you heard about it all the time. The polar vortex is a normal thing that happens every winter, because what happens in the Arctic all winter, there's no sunlight. So cold air pools naturally. And when air sinks and descends over a large area, it rotates counterclockwise, hence the polar and the vortex. So it's a normal thing every year. But what we watch as meteorologists and climatologists is it a strong polar vortex or a weak one? Now it seems kind of counterintuitive. If you don't want a super cold winter, you want a strong polar vortex, because that means on the left, it's rotating fast. So you have more of a circular polar jet stream. But when it's weaker, the jet stream becomes a little wavier, you get lobes of cold that come through. Or like this year, it was strong so that you had things trying to knock it off of the pole, but it more stretched it out so that we got lobes of it close to us, but didn't descend on us. And the difference basically is, think of last February was an actual polar vortex disruption, where the polar vortex broke into 2 pieces, and one made it all the way to Texas, and we had power outages, record cold. That's when we had 10 days of almost every day was below zero. I think maybe 1 day in that stretch wasn't. So that's when we really noticed it. And our coldest temperature was colder than anything we had this winter. And it just kind of rotates around. And if it happens in the middle of the winter, that disruption, it will regain itself and rotate again, because it's still dark and cold in the Arctic. But it also dies naturally in the spring, because by February, March, sunlight is reaching the Arctic again, and that just completely reverses the process. And so in a normal year, the vortex just sort of weakens slowly or falls into some pieces, and we have normal cold snaps that we get in the spring. But sometimes, like this year, it was a strong vortex and it got knocked off its rocker and split into 2 chunks. Because we had that La Nina pattern, which was funneling everything in our direction, we have been seeing the death blow of the polar vortex for a month. That disruption happened back in March, when we were actually relatively mild. It was a couple of days in the 60s. And so it takes several weeks for that whole process to play out. And so all of April, we've been warming up the Arctic air basically for the rest of the planet. So if you know anybody anywhere else who say you're welcome, we've been warming up all the cold air. But the problem is, that we're going to get to, is then it means there's no cold air left, really. So that's how, once we've warmed it up, the temperature skyrockets. Whether that happens in 2 weeks or 4 weeks, it's going to probably happen. That in the background of climate change. So I have a picture of a refrigerator here to think of. Think of a refrigerator and freezer as the polar vortex, and the refrigerator doors are like the jet stream. When the jet stream is, in a normal year, what happens is you shut off the refrigerator, you turn up the thermostat 10 degrees, let's say that's normal spring, right? Well, normally the doors are going to kind of open and close. You'll get sort of wafting waves of cool air from the fridge, and it will slowly be warmed up until there's no cold air left in the fridge, and the room gradually warms, right? But in a year like this, we had a major disruption. Warm air that was persistent all winter over Siberia was constantly trying to knock the polar vortex out. Warm air rises, and we have a large area of it. It's trying to knock this spinning top basically off, but we had a strong vortex. It just kind of got stretched, wobbled a bit, but didn't get disrupted until it was weakened, because you had spring already, and then that completely disrupted it. So it's like ripping off the doors on the fridge, you can think. So then you have one giant blast of cold. That's what all of April's been. But once that's gone, thermostat's going to go up all of a sudden. This is looking at the cold northern hemisphere for the month of April. You can see we're like really the only cold spot in the whole hemisphere. Yay! But But it has been worse in Northwest. North Dakota, again, we might complain, northern Minnesota's been worse. North Dakota's been even worse. Not just the blizzards, but the temperature anomalies you can kind of see in green. Well, we have been averaging 6-7 degrees below normal. It's been 10 to 12 up there. And when will it all change finally? This is looking. The computer models show, so the forecast is the blue line. This is an average of all the different computer models. And the red line is the normal high. And you can see once we head into the second week of May, basically all the models agree that we are at least consistently normal, which by that time is mid to upper 60s. I'll take it. Probably some 70s there. So we probably have at least the first week of May will still be cooler than normal, mainly 50s, but even that, you know, with progress. Like this weekend, nowhere in Minnesota is going to get snow. That's progress. They're just happy that they're getting only rain. Something you gardeners probably pay attention to are the normals, the average high, the average low. When is the first frost, last frost, all those things. And we update them every 10 years. And we use a 30-year average to give us sort of a picture of the modern climate. So that's one thing we have to remember is when we're talking about it being below or above normal, we're talking about based on the modern normal. So when it's above normal, which it is a lot, it's above the modern normal even, which is already above the historical average. And so our new 30-year normals that we just started using last year, every single month except 2 saw increases in temperature, not surprising. But what is sort of surprising, but also plays into what we we're just talking about, 2 months saw actual decrease in temperature, February and April. So we are seeing some trends in Minnesota, and this is through the whole upper Midwest, of on average cooler Februaries and Aprils sometimes. Not every year, but we're getting more of, there's some really fascinating research that we're seeing more of these polar vortex disruptions I was just talking about. Because we're warming the Arctic so fast, it's messing up the whole system. Because the jet stream is dependent on temperature differences. And the Arctic is warming 2 to 4 times faster than the rest of the planet. So that difference between the Arctic, the mid-latitudes, and the tropics is less. So the jet stream is weaker. And when you get that weaker jet stream back to there, you're going to get more outbreaks of the cold, ironically. And one of the ways we can measure the planet, so I'll go back to this first. One of the interesting measurements is the cold that we're getting is warmer than the cold used to be. So while it's below normal for us, because Arctic air in Minnesota is still cold, that air is warmer than it used to be. So while we have this outbreak of cold across the hemisphere, you can't see it there. But the average temperature in the lower right for the whole hemisphere is still well above normal. So it's big picture. We're cold, but the rest of the hemisphere on average is warm. Biggest changes, the temperature changes in the whole year are September and December. Our Septembers and Decembers are getting warmer quicker in our new 30-year normals. And that kind of jives with what people sort of anecdotally know. Summer seems to be lingering, falls are getting warmer. And it seems like winters are getting a later start. You know, a lot of years where it's like, geez, where's the snow? How many years we're like, yeah, white Christmas? I mean, I don't care, but. And then in some years, a lingering winter effect because of these disruptions of the polar vortex, because there's less sea ice and there's more heat being emitted by the oceans. That's creating this persistent bubble of heat that's knocking off the polar vortex more and more. So there's been a measurable increase in polar vortex disruptions over the last 50 years. Our winter temperatures are warming the fastest, and Minnesota, Wisconsin, and also New Hampshire and Vermont are seeing the fastest changes in the lower 48 in the winter months. And can anybody guess what state actually beats us in winter warming? Not on this map. I think I heard it. Alaska. Because they have actual Arctic real estate. The more your winter weather is influenced by the Arctic, which we are partly, the biggest changes you're going to see in your winter temperatures. So Alaska's warming even more, and it only stands to reason that states that have legitimate winters, us and parts of the Northeast are seeing some of the biggest winter changes. Our cold snaps, on average, there are 4 fewer days of below normal temperatures, and you think, well, again, it's hard to complain about not having real cold weather. But that cold is what all of our flora and fauna have evolved to. 20 below zero temperatures used to be much more common. On average, before 1900, we used to have 3 to 6 nights in the 20s below zero or colder in the winter. Now it happens once every 2 years on average. And the last time we did it was 2019. So as cold as last February was, as cold as this seemed to be, although what's funny is now that I'm getting old, the people who complained about this winter were mostly like under 30, I noticed. Because, and I mean, I'm not, just not complaining about young people. They have, their whole lifetimes have been warmer winters, dominated by warmer winters. So this felt cold to them, And this winter was below normal, but the normals that we have now, when you looked at this last winter, it was actually average for the historical, going back all the way to 1873. It was a totally average winter, which is crazy. Our grandparents and great grandparents were right. They really did walk to school uphill both ways. The number of sub-zero high temperatures in an average winter have gone from 6 to 2. Again, hard to complain about, but it does have impacts on things. And the extremes are warming faster than the averages. And we're seeing that on the hot end and the cold end. So, while our average winter temperature has warmed about 3 to 4 degrees since a century ago, the coldest temperature of the winter is warmed 12 degrees. And we'll get into a little bit about why that happens. So I gave part of this away. But yeah, this winter, when you compare it to the full average of the record, was average. And 2 degrees above the average if you look at the pioneer period, the first 30 years. So if we did the 30-year normals, 1873 to 1903, this winter was warmer than normal. I think it's funny, I've done a bunch of stuff on, if you know, like the history of the St. Paul Winter Carnival. It was partly a marketing thing, because like the New York Times and all these East Coast papers were writing at that time in the 1880s, Minnesota and Wisconsin is an American Siberia, fit for human habitation. And it was bad, probably. But so they thought, well, we're going to have fun with it. Sort of like when we had the Super Bowl a few years ago, like bold north. You can't escape it. Might as well embrace it, right? So that's kind of where the Winter Carnival came out. And it really was. I mean, it was American Siberia. And you go back to the Lewis and Clark expedition. One of the things before they left that Thomas Jefferson wanted Lewis and Clark to look for were woolly mammoths out here. He thought that because in the East Coast, they were digging up these bones and they looked fresh. They're like, gosh, are these things out there? So thinking Lewis and Clark, you're already nervous. You're going to where no man's gone before. They're like, oh, wait, look for giant furry elephants too. Oh, God. How much is my life insurance policy? This whole winter, the coldest temperature at the Emerson Airport was 17 below zero. Pathetic. Last year was 19 below. Even in that cold snap we had, 19 below historically is nothing. Now, when we're talking about Minneapolis, there's an urban heat island effect too. I know that most of you guys out here reached 20 below zero this winter and last winter. And we'll show, I have a map that shows the average coldest winter temperatures, the modern normals. And so what's remarkable, this is a hard selling point to some people, but what's remarkable about the cool weather we have this winter is it's actually another sign of a warming climate, because statistically, when you look at the data, this was a winter that we should have on average once every 5 years, but it actually, we're overdue. It had been 8 years since we had a winter that was this cool. So we're seeing things that should be arriving more frequently already becoming less frequent, because the whole thing is shifting faster than the pile of data can keep up with. Because when we're looking at, based on 1991 to 2020 data, statistically, this is a winter that should happen once every 5 years. But clearly, you have to look at the most recent decade is already warmer than that 30-year average. Spring's getting warmer, not this year. And again, this is what people think I'm kind of nuts, but I'm trying to sell people on this mindset. It does make you get to this cold weather easier. I'm like, I'm actually kind of embracing it because it's a rare chance of sort of a correction in the atmosphere because it's been so warm that I welcome a cold month to try to, like, even though it's not really, it's a drop in the bucket, slowing things maybe in the scheme of things a little bit. Because last year was our 5th hottest year ever across Minnesota and Wisconsin and North Dakota and South Dakota. It was the 4th hottest fall. June was the 2nd hottest. So to have a few cool months, this doesn't even put a dent in the warmth we had last year. It was so warm. The only month that was below normal was February. And again, that's based on the modern normals. Every single month except one was warmer than normal last year. So this is kind of like the stock market has corrections. This is just a little correction that, you know, isn't even going to do much really in the scheme of things. Here's an example of prior to the 1960s, 80-degree temperatures in March, which is infrequent, right? The last time it happened was 2012, I believe, St. Patrick's Day. And I think that was a Friday too. So like, don't go anywhere near St. Paul on that day. Prior to the 1960s, we'd only ever hit 80 in March once. So in 90 years, it only hit it once. But now, since the 1960s, you've hit it 5 times. So again, it's still infrequent, not something you can depend on every year, but we've made it much more likely by shifting the dials a bit. Again, I'm going to talk a little bit more about why that's happening. This is just showing the average temperature for Minnesota, western Wisconsin, close enough. And there's a marked shift here since the 1970s, which we'll talk a little bit more about too. June this last year, 2nd hottest, as I talked about. We had 12 days in the 90s when the average number is 3 for the month of June. The only year that beat us was 1931. That was hot. We were the 4th warmest autumn. 80% of, this is what's interesting too. I like to do statistical correlations and see if there's, because people always ask, well, what is, when it's warm in October, what does this mean about our winter? Usually nothing. Or what does April mean about the summer? Nothing. If anything, when it's this cold, there's a strong correlation that the summer that follows will be warm. So actually, because it is, I get 2 top questions this month. One is it windier than normal? It seems like it's windy all the time. Yes, you're not crazy. Maybe you are, but I can't diagnose that. 2 is, what does April mean about the summer or May? Well, when we have April's this cold, 3 out of 4 times the May that follows ends up being cooler than normal too. Mainly because you have the lingering effects of the cold. Even 1 week, the first week of May being cool, will probably make May slightly cooler than normal, but not in the magnitude that April was. But I do think it'll be hot by the end of the month. But what's interesting, when you look at really cold Aprils, the summers that follow, 3/4 of them are hotter than normal. So a huge opposite correlation. Then you look at the background of climate change, we're almost guaranteed a hot summer. Sorry. Maybe you like that, some people. They're usually not people who farm or live in the very middle of the city. I find. Our average temperature, this is just showing the average increase. And our top hottest years, most of them are all very recent. I have lots of charts and figures here. This is showing the average annual temperature, and it's warmed 3 degrees since the first 30-year normal. And 3 degrees doesn't sound like much, but it's actually huge when you're talking about an average statistically. And this is all going to tie in together here pretty shortly. So 2021, the heat that we had last year, this is the top 10 hottest years. And what I want you to note, 2012, 2016, 2021, 2006, 2017, 2015. 60% of the top 10 years are all since 2006. So all in the last 15 years. Despite only making up 10% of our records, they make up 60% of the top 10 spots. 2021, when we statistically analyze it, should be a once in a basically half century kind of occurrence, but now it's a 1 in 6 year kind of occurrence. And this is talking about an average, and we've made it 8 times more likely a warm year like last year by just warming up our average temperature 2.4 degrees. And so this gets into the statistics of why that is. And so one of the things I want to start with MPRC is what I'm going to call the 2 degrees project, because you have one of the goals that the world is trying to get to is limit warming to just a couple degrees. Why that number? And Minnesota's warmed a couple degrees. You hear 2 degrees a lot. It doesn't sound like much. Like, what's the difference to us, 50 or 52, right? To go outside, when we're talking about averages, it's a huge difference. And the reason is because when we look at large sets of data, it piles up in basically a hill shape, right? So the average is in the middle, the extremes are on either side of that. But when you shift the average just a little bit, you now make what was a little sliver on either end multiple times more of the area, or more likely. So if you kind of seen that example, the darker red, I don't know how visible that is, was a little sliver on the edge, but by just shifting the whole data set a little bit, you've exponentially grown that size and chopped off the cold end. So I'll give you some examples here. So again, little changes in averages have big changes on the extremes. So going back to that March example, talking about 80 degrees in March. So at the top, it used to be a once in a 62 year thing if we were to look at the old records. Now we've made it a once in a 12 year occurrence. So we've made it 5 times more likely by warming March temperatures 2 to 3 degrees. Because by changing it half a standard deviation, we've made that dark orange area on the right multiple times bigger. And then you notice how much of that cold disappears too. So the extremes become exponential. So what used to be a less common, hotter temperature now becomes 5 times more likely, for example. And then that equivalent cold, so let's say we're talking about, April, where the average high temperature is 55 degrees. And say like 90 on one end, that's an April extreme, right? It happens. But that's 35 degrees above the average, and 35 degrees below that would be 20, right? For a high temperature. Well, now we've made 90 degrees 5 times more likely to happen in April, but that 20 degree high temperature 5 times less likely. They're both equivalent sides on the old historical data set of the average. So we look at last year, 2021, I think this is for June. It's just another example of 2021, an outlier, a 5th warmest year, a once in 75 year. This is for June. Should be a once in 75 year deal, because we've shifted it. We've made it, this is what I'm going. Okay, so once in a 75 year event. So still infrequent. Whoops. But going back, pre-industrial warming. So if we went before 1900, statistically, it should only happen once every 300 years, last June. But we've made it possible 4 times more likely by just warming up June temperatures a few degrees. And so when we talk about the cap for the Paris Accords, 2 degrees Celsius warming, already June of last year will become a 1 in 27 year event instead of once in 75 years. So 3 times more likely. And if we go on our current track, it becomes a once in an 8 year event. And if we do nothing, it becomes the new normal. So just showing how those shifting, that little bit of a shift of a degree or two, another degree or two, another degree or two, what impact that has. And just looking at some of the cold examples, Again, this is for the Twin Cities, 30 degrees below zero prior to 1900. Not common. It was about an every other year occurrence, but you know, it definitely happened. But based on our new normals, now it's only a once in a generational kind of cold. So once every 29 years statistically. The last time it happened, 1996. Remember that year? That was a cold one. But since 2010, with the modern decade of warming, now we've made it a once in every 42-year thing. So will it ever be 30 below again in the Twin Cities? Probably, but it will be very infrequent, much less frequent than it used to be. So we've made the odds of hitting 30 below 20 times less likely by warming the average temperature of the winter 3.4 degrees. So these seemingly little changes have huge impacts that way. And the reason I like to use the 30 below zero, the emerald ash borer, those ugly little guys. We know that 30 to 40 below zero kills 99% of their larvae. So, and this is just one example of an invasive species. So we know that prior to 1900, if somebody brought over emerald ash borer, it probably wouldn't have taken root in Minnesota because it would have been too cold. If every other year it's 30 below zero, wiping out all the larvae, it's just not going to make any progress. Now we know northern Minnesota still does it, and again, this is one of the things we tried to remind people all winter. Hey, at least northern Minnesota doesn't have any emerald ash borer larvae, right? It's maybe not fit for human habitation either. And it's significant because I think there was just a story that up around, was it in Cloquet? Somewhere in that area, they discovered signs of emerald ash borer. Doesn't mean that they found larvae right now, but it meant that it was probably there last summer and nobody really knew about it yet. But that, so hopefully this winter killed it, and that, you know, in Carleton County at least. But, you know, for how long? So this is what I was talking about earlier, the average coldest temperature of the winter. So in this part of western Wisconsin, 2021 below zero is on average what you can expect for your coldest temperature of the winter. And you compare that to MSP, which is just to the left there, to the west, 16 below. So that's primarily an urban heat island impact there. So we know that's contributed to, makes on average some of those cold extremes 4 to 5 degrees warmer there. But then you look into northern Minnesota, the average coldest temperature in the winter, 36 below, 33 below, 38 below in International Falls. You know, International Falls hit 40 below zero 3 times this winter, which hadn't happened in a decade. So safe to say no emerald ash borer out there. And I think a few people might have left and said they're done. It also has impacts on Lyme disease. This is showing the distribution of Lyme disease just from the mid to late 90s compared to the late 2000s. So not even this most recent decade, but the incidence rates of Lyme disease increasing. Allergies, anybody have allergies? The season's getting longer, 3 weeks more of allergy season already now. So not good. Basic trends for this region, it's becoming wetter overall, warmer and wetter. So that was one of the interesting things about last year, the drought. We're still going to have droughts. We're still weather, climate, 2 separate things. But overall wetter, you know, 2 years before last year, 2019, you might remember, was the wettest year on record by a lot, which beat the previous wettest year on record was 2016. Only 3 years earlier. So it's definitely getting a lot wetter. We average about 30 inches of annual precipitation. Now that includes snow in the winter, the liquid equivalent. It used to be about 25. More erosion. The biggest source of that increase is extreme precipitation events. So those summer 2-3 inch rainfalls that used to be almost unheard of are happening a lot more frequently. A warmer atmosphere holds more water vapor. Storms are more powerful, hurricanes are more powerful. There's just more water, and not only the water content, but when thunderstorms or hurricanes form, as the moisture condenses, the heat from that water molecule is released. We call it latent heat. It's the main energy driver of a hurricane. So it has a twofold effect: more water total in the storm, but also more heat that continues to grow the storm, making it more unsettled. So this is just looking at some of the parameters. Frost-free season, 16 days less of the frost season. And, you know, again, if you're growing stuff, you're like, oh, I have 2 extra weeks to grow things, you know. What's benefit, not benefit, more precipitation, and 35% increase in those extreme precipitation events. This is looking at 2019, which is the top figure there in white, where we had that year in particular over 40 inches of precipitation when the average is 30. So 10 inches above normal, but a third more water in the year. That's huge. And that's why, like in the city, I run around today, Scott, formerly Lake Calhoun, almost every day. And it's the trails eroding all over because of downpours. And of course, it's magnified in the city because you have pavement, which just rushes water more towards those areas anyway. And this is just showing time, but 1 degree increase in temperature, Fahrenheit, just 1 degree increases the water vapor 4%. So when we're talking a few degrees, all of a sudden now we're talking 12% more water vapor. That's a lot of water when a hurricane is made of water or a thunderstorm is made of water. And this is showing an increase in downpours defined by more than 1 or 2 inches of rainfall in one single event. And the Midwest and the Northeast are seeing the highest increase. 42% increase in downpours here in the Northeast, 55% increase. And actually in the Southwest, a 10% increase. But when you increase 1 downpour a year by 10%, it's not much. But they do get a monsoon season. That's where, you know, places like Arizona rely heavily on precipitation. Is in the late summer, just these pop-up thunderstorms. What we would call a normal July day is, you know, where they get their precipitation from. This is just showing precipitation changes. So in the top left, this is average precipitation across Minnesota 1891 to 1920. And then the lower right, getting closer to the modern decade. Notice the blue expand. That's greater than 30 inches. So it used to be just southeastern Minnesota. Now it is a majority of Minnesota. It gets 30 inches precipitation. Another fascinating thing is to look at, you know, people always ask, well, what are we going to look like in the future? Will we be, you know, somewhere in Iowa or wherever? So where's the Twin Cities climate of that first set of 30-year normals, 1873 and 1903? It's now basically like McGregor or Aiken. So if you want to go to where Minnesota was when it was, you know, not habitable for human habitation, you simply go to McGregor. So think of how much cooler it is up there, how much shorter the growing season is. That was the climate of this area more than a century ago. Where are we headed? Well, this is just showing where we would shift based on those different temperature thresholds. If we continue our current climate, so our current climate today is basically where Mason City, Iowa is. We have the Mason City, Iowa climate of more than a century ago. But if we follow the Paris cap on emissions, we become Des Moines. And nothing against Des Moines, I just don't want to be that. If we continue our current track, which would be 3 degrees warming, we become Kansas City. I think they have good barbecue, but I don't know that translates. And if we do nothing, 4 degrees of warming, we become Fayetteville, Arkansas. I don't think anybody wants to be Arkansas, especially northern. I don't know what's in northern Arkansas. I don't know. Maybe that's the Ozarks are down there. I guess it's kind of pretty, right? But yeah. And we lose all the things that make Minnesota. You know, I'll hear sometimes from people like, well, why do we care if Minnesota, Wisconsin warms up? It'll be nicer. People will want to live here, right? The price of my home will go up. Well, but all the things that we like, you know, our fishing, our hunting, the flora and fauna, the trees that all that stuff is affected by. And of course, things can evolve and adapt, but not on the scale. The pace of change that we're creating is something that hasn't happened in tens of thousands of years, or more likely, probably millions of years. So yes, nature adapts, the planet changes all the time, but on scales that are slower so that things can adapt and evolve. And when things change too fast, we call that a mass extinction event. And that's, you know, the dinosaurs or other things. And this is, many scientists consider we are the beginning of a 6th mass extinction. It's the only one ever that's been caused by another species.
both in terms of climate change, but also habitat loss, destruction. This is getting back into those downpour events, looking at some major record ones, September 14th, 15th, 2004, in southeastern Minnesota, 9 inches of rain in a day and a half, 13 inches of rain, August 18th to the 20th, 2007. And you might remember like the Rushford, Peterson area, southeastern Minnesota, they had all that flooding, wiping out a lot of areas. And then September 2010, there was a 2-day period of 9 inches of rain. All three of those are supposed to be 500-year floods that happen 3 times in a 5-year period. So again, that's how I like to talk about these frequencies. This should be a 1 in 50 year or 1 in 100-year thing, because then you realize, okay, the data shifted because it's not that anymore. If we're having 6 of the top 10 warmest years in the last 15 years, something's up. You don't have to be a meteorologist or climate scientist to get that. And it is warming more the farther north you go. And we talked about this too, Alaska, go into Canada, you can see this map continue. So south central Minnesota, southern Wisconsin, seeing some of the slower increases compared to the northern parts of the state. And one of the things I like to show is there's a reason that there's a discernible change around the 60s and 70s. And this is showing in red is carbon dioxide emissions, one of the main greenhouse gases. And then in blue is the world population. What do you notice about those 2 lines? Now, correlation, it doesn't imply causation, but the more people, the more emissions, right? And so I taught middle schoolers earth science last spring. And one of the assignments I gave them was, well, what's the solution? More kids than I would care to mention, so we just have to kill more people. Or we learn to live more sustainably. You know, there's a way that we can live within the whole planet. And again, you're looking at the pace of extinctions versus human population, similar graph. In purple is the human population, green is the rate of extinctions, really skyrocketing in the last 50 years. And again, this is multiple pronged event. Climate change is a stressor on a lot of animals. But then there's the loss of habitat, and a lot of things like in Africa, the range of lions used to be almost all of Africa into Greece, Turkey, Israel, all had lions just like 150 years ago. A predator needs a huge range for their food source. And so you can't just lock them into national parks or reserves. Birds, we've lost 2.9. This was a big story a couple years ago. A report really analyzing it. We've lost billions of birds in the last 50 years. And again, this is multiple reasons. Climate change is one of them. US Bank Stadium is another. I don't know who thought it'd be a good idea to put a piece of aluminum foil along the Mississippi River Flyway, which is a major migratory route. And again, there are solutions. I think, one of the things that's tragic about that is they could have put on the glass that would have been less reflective, but they didn't want to spend the extra money. And now I think they're doing it anyway because there's been enough outcry. The Audubon Society has volunteers who go and pick up dead birds every migration season downtown to keep track of what species, how many. And so this is a thing, they've measured a huge increase because of downtown Minneapolis already, because what do you notice if you look at it at night? Downtown lit up, it looks like the night sky. If you're a bird, you're like, And so every morning there are birds littering downtown. And if you know anybody who walks around to work early in the morning, back when you worked in an office, they would see these things. There's just a bunch of different species. I won't go into, I can talk about all this stuff forever, but one of the things that I will end on and then take questions is Minnesota and Wisconsin is, I know after a cold April, everybody's like, get me out of here to anywhere, Iowa, Fayetteville, Arkansas, where it's warm. But we really live in a unique place. And I think that, the Twin Cities, River Falls are the same. We live in the convergence of major ecosystems here. And it's these periphery habitats, the edge of the prairie, the edge of the forest. These are the areas most at risk.
And so like, I talk about in Minnesota, the icon in the North Woods is the moose. There will be no more moose in northern Minnesota by the end of this century. That's almost a foregone conclusion. Now, it's an example of moose aren't going to go extinct this century because you'll still have Alaska and Canada and Maine, or Quebec. There's a lot, well, it's Canada, even though they don't want to be part of Canada. But we will lose them from the North Woods.
I lied, I'm gonna end on one other slide.
I think it's funny, Carlsbad in northwestern Minnesota used to call itself the moose capital of the North. They had this sign above, there's no more moose in northern Minnesota, or northwestern Minnesota, sorry. There are still moose in northeastern Minnesota, of course, but northwestern Minnesota, when they see a moose, it's one that wanders in across the border occasionally and goes back. So it's a sign of just in our lifetimes that we're losing species like this. And again, the moose is a complicated thing. It's climate change that's making them more stressed so that they're more prone to diseases. White-tailed deer carry diseases that don't affect them, but they can bring it to moose. And like the North Shore of Lake Superior, a lot of people don't realize deer didn't exist there a century ago. They're not native to the North Shore. There were none until the 1940s, really. So, hunt all the deer you want in northern Minnesota. And that's part of adjusting is we're trying to slow down a fast moving train, right? Climate. So we know that it's going to continue to get warmer, even if we stop everything we're doing right now. So part of the solutions too have to include mitigation. How do we adapt to the new normal? And there's some cool stuff like the DNR group with moose to try to say, okay, where are there more dense populations of moose? Where do they overlap the most with deer so that we can try to get deer out of that area and control it better? Because the big thing, that the brainworm, chronic wasting disease, but then like winter ticks. I don't even know if you guys have all had dinner already, right? This is gross. This is a deer, or not deer, a moose calf covered in ticks, winter ticks. Because the warmer winters mean these ticks don't fall off. And so these moose are like scratching against trees, wasting time that they should be eating to try to get rid of this itch. And so they become anemic or hypothermic, and it's, not good. Anyway, on that happy note, there are solutions. That's the great thing about this, we know what to do, we've wasted some time, decades, but we know what to do. We know the solutions. And I'm guessing most of you have kids and grandkids and want to leave them something that would be recognizable to their ancestors. Right, Ophelia, right? See? Got one of the future right here. Just have to clean up this whole mess all by herself. Any questions? I covered a lot. I think I have, I'll put up my email on here somewhere. Do I have it at the beginning? Maybe. Oh, there it is. I don't know if you guys can see that. It's hard for me to see that screen from here. But just Sven Sundgarrd at Gmail, or you can, if you go to MPR, you can click on my bio and there's an email there. So any questions you have, or maybe you want to know specific stuff there is cooperative observations of precipient snowfall for like river falls specifically, just not temperature evidence. Yes.
So from Zoom, so you'll have to repeat.
Oh, yes, okay.
Duke wants to know if we are going to be experiencing more windy days.
So, yeah, Duke, you said?
Yeah.
Okay, Duke wants to know if we're can expect to experience more windy days. So the reason we're seeing the windier than normal period right now, so that's not something we're seeing as a trend with climate change. There doesn't seem to be an increase in wind. This year in particular, the issue has been because we've been in this cool pattern, there's been a lot of temperature fluctuations. You might remember January, February, we had a lot of those days where we had overnight high temperatures, where they're like, yeah, the high was 40, but nobody got to enjoy it because it was at 1 a.m. And then it dropped all day. We had like double the normal amounts of winter that happened. So you get nighttime high temperatures because the biggest influence on our temperature is air masses, not the sun. And so we had a lot of those shifts back and forth between cold and warm. And whenever air is moving, you get wind. And so because of those big back and forths in temperature, it was windier. We also, this month, what added to that back and forth of the temperature was we've had a big storm system every single week, which is a result of that polar vortex breaking up dramatically in March. It's basically chunks of cold all across the northern hemisphere. That's what these big storm systems really are, just chunks of cold air aloft. That's instability that creates the rain, snow, severe weather on the southern end. And so we had an unusual number of those. That's why it's wetter than normal too. So I don't think that's a trend you have to worry about wind. Whenever you have a particularly anomalous pattern like this, you're gonna
Is it cloudier also? It seems cloudier.
Yeah, this month, I don't know offhand, I'd have to look that up, but I probably is typically this time of year when it's cooler, it's usually also cloudier. And that would make whenever it's wetter. So that's one of the interesting things too about, so our summer temperatures are increasing too, but we're actually seeing one day fewer 90 degrees than we used to because of these increasing downpours, leftover clouds from storms. So the average temperature is going up, but the extremes are fewer because there's slightly less sunshine. So, but yeah, this month's probably cloudier because it was every Wednesday since spring started in March. We had 5 Wednesdays in a row where we had a major storm system. And this week we didn't. Instead, it's coming on the weekend. But that's progress. A little more time between them. Yeah.
So, what can we as the average consumer do?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Sorry. Yeah. So she asked, what do we do as the average person, consumer? Consumer is a good word because there's a lot of power in how we consume things to lessen climate change. And there's a ton of things, and trying to do all of them is pretty hard for most people. Like you're not going to guilt everybody to drive an electric car. I drove my Jeep Wrangler, which has horrible mileage. But there's choices in how we consume things. Go to your local farm for produce. There's a lot of greenhouse gas emissions in transportation. Food waste is a huge thing. I know Minneapolis, where I live, they started composting. But like now that I live in a condo or apartment building, they don't have it in the buildings. It's like you only can get it if you're in a house. I'm like, why? So I'm trying to lobby to get composting. But the Minneapolis has other things to worry about right now too. So actually what I do, it's kind of funny. On my way to the gym once a week, we put our compost and compost bags in our freezer, and then I sneak into an alley out by my gym and dump it in somebody else's compost. So I'm waiting for the day that they catch me and they're like, what the hell are you doing? Just putting my compost here. Maybe illegal, I don't know. So yeah, what can we do? The biggest thing, and I know people don't want to talk politics, but holding politicians accountable, voting, making a priority, it shouldn't be a partisan issue. That's what I think is frustrating in modern times, because I look back at the 70s, the Endangered Species Act, the Clean Air and Water Act. That was all Richard Nixon administration. He would be a hippie now, basically. The first Earth Day was 1970. A Wisconsin senator, was he a Republican? Yeah. But these collectively, Americans in the 60s and 70s were like, wait a minute, yeah, our water's dirty, there's air pollution, we have an ozone hole. We don't want this, we want to fix this. And so as a country and as a world, we decided to change things. And then that's, a glimmer of hope. The world said we wanted this ozone hole is a major deal. So we got rid of chlorofluorocarbons, and the ozone repaired itself pretty quickly. We only get an ozone hole now really in Antarctica seasonally because of the polar vortex. They get one in Antarctica too. Because that spin gets so intense, it kind of isolates the air
the atmosphere so that an ozone naturally develops and then fills in again in the spring. So yeah, that's a big one. Just holding people accountable. But there's a lot of, less food waste, the obvious thing about trying to be greener in terms of our energy use. And, yet another example, there's like every day another example of reasons not to have oil. You look like Europe's learning fast, like, oh, we're getting oil from Russia and they're not nice anyway. So another reason to fast track towards cleaner energy. Yes, sir.
Get the average temperatures. Are they the official temperature?
Yeah, he's asking what the official averages for temperature. Yeah, so a lot of our temperatures come from airports because even little municipal airport has to have weather data for aviation. So that's your most reliable source of at least regionally temperature records. But there are weather stations all over, a lot of the Department of Transportations have weather sensors along the roads now too. And what's helped fill in a lot of gaps since the 70s, satellites. Satellites fill in a lot of data now. And that's why forecasts have gotten a lot better too since the 70s. Satellites are, because if I pulled up a map showing where all the automated weather sensors are in North America, you'd see a bunch of them where there are cities, because there's more people, there's more airports. In Canada, there's a huge void. It's conceivable that a chunk of Arctic air can leave the Northwest Territories of Canada and not be detected by a sensor until it hits Winnipeg. So that's why, if you remember, even just 20, 30 years ago, you're looking at the 5-day forecast, you're like, oh, the weekend looks pretty nice. And then all of a sudden on Thursday, wait, why it's gonna be 20 below now? What the hell happened? Because all of a sudden, that air mass got to a sensor and they're like, oh, wait, there's cold air, but it's only only the size of Minnesota, which is a big chunk of air, but it can go undetected in Canada. But satellites now give us that ability to thermally sense our oceans, vast areas of the planet that it's hard to get. We can actually now accurately measure precipitation in the Amazon. There aren't people out there with a rain gauge. This is all satellite derived now. So the more information we have, the better we're going to understand the issues and how to fix them too. Yes.
This winter, it seemed did not get a January thaw or February.
It was at 1 a.m. for 2 hours. Yeah.
In the wintertime, the extremes. More of a steady cold.
That's an interesting. So she asked for our Zoom audience about there seems to be less extremes, more cold in the dead of winter. Particularly this winter, we didn't really have that January thaw. I guess winter this year said, well, you've had it all in December, so you're done. So one of the things we measure, I talked a little bit about. I don't usually like to go too in depth in case I don't have. Most people don't have a big statistics background, but standard deviation. So the deviation from normal. So like today, for example, the normal high is 62 for this day. Depressing, right? But the standard deviation, when you look at all 30, or even if you looked at 150 years, is huge this time of year, because this time of year has a lot of natural volatility. So while the average is 62, the standard deviation is like plus or minus 9 degrees. Meaning that 68% of the data for all 150 years on April 28th, 68% of the days are going to fall between 53 and 71 degrees, which seems right. And even today, actually, we made it to 52, so we're almost there. But so standard deviation is a way we can measure what's the natural volatility in a month. April has the highest volatility of the whole year. And you think about it, it makes sense. Even in a normal April, it can be 10 degrees one morning at the beginning of the month. And in a normal April, it can be 75, 80 degrees later in the month. And we don't get that kind of variation in the dead of summer. So we call the dog days of summer. August has the least standard deviation. It's only like 3 degrees in August. So one of the interesting things that I've noticed, because statistically looking at this, you're right. January is becoming warmer, but it's almost also becoming consistently warmer.
And a really good example of this was last January was really mild. It was our 12th warmest January, but we had no 40-degree days. But it was in the 30s, like 23 of the 31 days. It was consistently warm and warm at night, warm by day, but not extreme. So while the January standard deviation used to be, let's just say 8 degrees, there's a little difference now of like maybe 7. So that's an interesting thing. And the same thing is happening in the summer. There's less volatility. You know, a summer 100 years ago could be 100, and then you have a day in the 60s for 4th of July sometimes. That never happens now. It's much more concise, a range of temperatures above the average, but less of a crazy range. Boy, you don't get 2. That's extra. Okay.
Hardiness.
Yeah.
A lot of plants and trees. Part of it is how many days really.
The extremes.
cold,
Yeah.
How long that duration is. Because it's just 1 or 2 nights. It doesn't affect the plants as much, but it's a continued super drop in temperature for say a week.
Yeah.
That affects your plant hardiness. So I'm wondering.
What zone?
Can we start planting zone 5?
Yeah. So she's asking about the hardiness zones that are based not on average temperature, but more what are the extreme colds in a certain region? Because, you know, yeah, so how long until we can grow peaches here, right? I don't know what the specific range is, but did you really? So it's already happening.
One blossoms, I have a peach tree I keep in my garage. And it's been a winter, and I put it up in the spring and it blossomed, but then we had that cold snap, and one blossom survived.
Oh, no. Yeah, so my brother, you guys know where the Carpenter Nature Center is? And my brother runs the orchard there. So I get to hear all about this stuff. I think last May, because last spring was really volatile. It was warm, it was cold, and we had a late freeze, and he was all worried about his apple blossoms. I'm like, just go out there and fan them. Yeah, so hardiness zones are going to change because one of the things that, as we mentioned, is changing exponentially are the cold extremes. And yeah, I don't know the particular hardiness zones. I'm not a gardener. I'm just an eater. We're zone 4. So I would be interested to see an analysis of what would we have been in the 1870s, 80s, 90s. What zone would we have been? I'm sure it would have been different. Yeah. And so what zone is Missouri and Arkansas? I'm sure there's more than one. Yeah. So that's where we're headed. I don't know if we'll all make it quite there. Even I won't be here at the end of the century, I hope. I'd be 119. I don't know if I want to live that long. My grandpa always said, no one wants to live to be 100 except the guy who's 99. And he died at 58, so I guess. Any other questions before I dart off to bed? Again, really feel free to email me. I love this stuff, so obviously.
Sharing your knowledge, and gives us a lot to think about. And we are going to the Carpenter Nature Center. No, I don't have my glasses. Okay. In July. Oh, thank you. Yeah. Well, that's how that connection is. So yeah. So we appreciate it,
See
and
my brother.
yeah, that'd be great.
I'm the better looking one. That's how you.
All right. Well, thank you so much again. We really appreciate it. So we're not done. For those of you that are on Zoom, we're not done. So please don't go away. And I just wanted to update you guys. I do have a updated schedule in the back, so if you want to grab one, but also today would be our last day here for the summer, so we will be on the road. So all our meetings going forward will be at different places, so make sure you follow with that. And then we have one in August that is getting confirmed, but we'll be back here in October. So that's exciting, and it's rain or shine, okay? But there you go, thank you.
Okay, so for you Zoomers, you can have a potty break, because we're gonna take a brief break here and have a refreshment, and we'll get back to the rest of our meeting. Thank you. Also, while you're on break here, these people, we have sign-up sheets for the plant sale. And we're gonna pass around. Did that happen yet? Okay.
There are two places.
Over on this table here, you can sign up to help with the plant sale. That would be wonderful.
There are seeds that they can buy over there from the previous. Yeah, they're in the back table. I brought in pigs.
We've also got seeds over there if you're interested, left over for the plant trials. Here, okay, folks. Let's bring her back together and wrap it up. Donna Davis had an announcement she wanted to make. So we're gonna, before I forget, yeah.
For those of you who are getting anxious about plants and things, the River Falls Garden Club plant sale is May 7th. This way, May 7th, Saturday morning, the morning before Mother's Day. You could also get a Mother's Day gift there too. They planters, and pots, annuals, perennials. They get plants from UW River Falls that have been raised in some unusual plants. And it will be River Falls at St. Bridget's in their gym, 9 o'clock, Saturday, May 7th. You got it?
Got it. Good, thank you. Now on our agenda, we have a plant sale report, and I think Christine's going to do that.
Gotta use the microphone, nobody else has to do their thing.
Right here so they can see you.
All right.
There you go.
I'm here. I'm going to talk about the plant sale, and I need to set this stuff down first. The exciting news is, yes, we are finally having a plant sale again. All right. They're going to teach me. I'm trainable. What you have going around on the clipboard is the same as the sign-up sheets over there. We just were trying to make it as easy as possible for as many people to sign up as quickly as possible. But the plant sale this year will be on Saturday, June 4th. And for those of you who haven't participated before, we do perennials and annuals, tubers and bulbs, lots of vegetable seedlings, and there's been a request to have more patio-sized vegetable seedlings, thinking primarily tomatoes. And then herbs, and then we always have an area of other garden-related materials that are still in good condition, like old pots you're not using or whatever, kind of a little rummage sale area. We are not able to sell houseplants just because they don't sell, so we recommend nobody bring them. But the other thing we need to check is that the plants that we are selling are not invasives. And if you aren't sure, the Wisconsin DNR does have a website that lists all the invasive plants for Wisconsin. We request that you, well, it's hard this year, but dig your plants as early as possible and divide them, because the longer they grow in the pots, the better they will look and the easier they are to sell. And of course, we can get more money from that way. We ask that you pot your plants and you label them. And if you go to our website, there is a form section and you can print off the labels. One of the tricks we've learned for the labels is if you fill them out and you use like packing tape, clear packing tape to put it on your pots, you can continue to water your pots and it won't smear your writing, so you can do it more easily. The big question this year has been, how are we going to handle the jumping worm problem? And we've talked with Diane about it to a great extent. And we have decided that this area of the state still has very few reported outbreaks of jumping worms. So we are going to ask that before you bring your plants, once you have them in the pots and the week before the sale, if you can drench them with a mustard powder water mix. And I have packets of mustard powder with instructions. What you do is you mix it with water. And then if you pick a random sampling of your plants, like maybe 3 or 5 or whatever that came from different areas in your yard, and you pour the water on it once and you wait and see if worms come to the top. Now we all know jumping worms are going to be baby worms in the spring. They aren't going to be the big worms that you see in all the advertisements or all the brochures about them. But the other trick to know that you have jumping worms is there are probably going to be a lot of them. So if you ever dig through your garden early in the spring and you see just tons and tons of little worms, it is reason to be concerned. But anyway, if your plants are clear of worms, then please, yes, do bring them on Friday. I have put together a bunch of packets of this. I will have more for you guys at the next meeting, or if you miss me otherwise. I had to buy a 40-pound quantity of mustard powder. So I really have a lot and don't really want to store it for years and years. Does anybody have any questions about? Yes. You don't need to test those. Oh, thank you. The question was, if you're bringing seedlings, do you need to check them for worms? And no, because you'll be using potting soil. This is just for the plants that you dig from your gardens. Yes. It just shows you the worms. It irritates them and it sends them to the surface. And they recommend that you try it twice. If you put the irritant in for the first time and nothing comes to the top, then wait like 5-10 minutes and pour another dousing of the water over it. And if they have been way at the bottom, they will come to the top. Yes, because you're gonna, unfortunately, because the spring has started so slowly, they probably are not going to germinate until almost the beginning of June, and we need to have the plants dug before then so that they look good in the pots. We are also looking for someone. We think it would be nice to have a display describing jumping worms and explaining why people, as they purchase these plants, might find yellow powder on the top of their plants or on the soil of their plants. If anybody feels artistic and is good at educational displays, please let us know. I'm also sending around a stack of flyers for the plant sale, and I want everyone to know that some of our usual advertising venues we weren't able to advertise in. So if everybody could commit to at least taking 2 and making sure they get left somewhere that other people would see, that would really be helpful. And then the sign-up sheets, if you read the top of them, there are lots of different little categories. We are also asking if you have brought materials, like I know some people bring tables, and some people are willing to put people's plants and trucks and things like that. So don't miss that sheet on there, and let us know what you have that you can bring and share. I know that we've needed a lot of wagons or old sleds. And I know we still have some of those, but it's been a couple years, and it would just make us feel more comfortable if we knew for sure all the bases were covered. And a little bit more about the time frame. Friday afternoon, we can bring the plants to the Octagon House. We can't really bring them before 4 o'clock. And they all need to go on the back side of the house, and that's where we sort and we price them. And then early in the morning on Saturday, the first crew that comes in is we move these all around to the front. So we really do need a big crew Friday night to help sort, organize, and price all of the plants. And then a big crew early in the morning to move them all from the back around to the front. Boxes, yes. Last year we had a lot of great boxes that were big and tall. We really are looking primarily for the flat ones that people can put plants in. So if you have those, yes, if you could save them and bring them, that would be great.
One question, what's going to happen when all the plants that do not get sold?
That is what we are looking for. We have in past years, people have contacted us because we've been advertised more places. First of all, our grant recipients can come after 1 o'clock and take what they need. But then any plants that remain, we are looking for a place or somebody else who's having a sale after ours that we can donate them to. So if people have ideas, please let us know. More questions? Yes. Thank you very much. I had forgotten that. I had a bunch of extra pots. I have a whole bunch of little 4-inch squares and then some bigger pots. Please, if you need pots, I'm happy to share. And if you are still in need of pots and all of those are gone, give me a shout out, because the pile out behind my house is big. All right, any more questions? All right. Anybody who wants to take stuff now, I'll just leave this bag on that back table as you walk out, and we'll have more at the next meeting.
Yeah, there'll be mustard at the May meeting for us to gather. We'll also have someone talking about the May meeting in a few minutes. Next on our agenda, we had grants, and Jenny is not here now. However, the grants have all been decided and the checks have been mailed. So we will get more information on our grants later. A recent workshop on weedless gardening, it was put on by SCVMGA. There were some issues with that. A bunch of people who had signed up for it and stuff could not get to it. Now, they apologized for that, and they do have it on the SCVMGA website now, so you could go and watch the whole thing if you would like. Good, it was very good. All right, great. Now, Donna May, you want to come on up here? Donna May would like to talk to us for a minute, and then we'll have Bridget tell us about our next meeting. And by the way, before I give it to Donna May, the next few meetings will be tours, so we will not be Zooming them. They will be in person only. We will be back here in October. We possibly might Zoom then. We'll see how much demand there is for it.
Thanks, Leroy. How many have got their 24 hours already lined up for this year? Well, that's true. 3, 4, 5. This in your chair. You've seen the easiest flyer there is. And this is our third year. Gregory's Gift of Hope has asked us again to do some yard work. 3 years ago, we did some landscaping. Last year, we're down there twice. And we cut, we weeded, we dug, we replanted. The second time we were there, we pulled out 72 bags of mulch. The third time was the blessing of the pets and the memorial gardens. This is for a good cause, and it's for your volunteer hours. So see you all May 21st, 9 o'clock.
All right, now we're gonna have Bridget tell us about our upcoming meeting.
Thanks. So next month on, what do we got here? May 26th, Heidi Doring is going to be presenting, and we are going to be going to her house. And so her address is on the sheets in the back if you don't have a current one, because right now the one that from before didn't say it, but her address is 1085 100th Street. And she said to make sure that you use street and not avenue, because then we won't see you. In Roberts. So that's on the sheet, and it will also probably be updated on the website, and we'll probably put it with the meeting notice as well to make sure of that. And then after that, then we will go in June, we'll be in River Falls at the Grow to Share Garden as well. So, and there's an address on the sheets. So that's the start of our summer. Hopefully it'll be nice and warm, and it is, rain or shine. So I know I said that before, but just a reminder to be ready. So, yeah.
Does anyone have anything else they would like to bring up before we close?
I was just gonna mention that if anybody's interested in the plant sale that's at the University of Wisconsin and the Earth Sciences, they actually have the greenhouses outside there. I went today and bought a lot of wonderful annuals and perennials and vine plants and so forth. But they have a lot of excellent varieties, and it's fun to spend time with the students. So there's 2 more days, and you can look it up online, I'm assuming, University of Wisconsin, River Falls, the Earth Science or Ag Department.
Thanks.
Sure.
So Leroy,
Yes,
it's Carolyn Littlefield.
Carolyn.
I can tell you the dates if other people can hear me. It's tomorrow of the sale. It's tomorrow from 10 to 6 and Saturday from 10 to 3, and it's in front of the University Center.
Okay, tomorrow, 10 to 3, 10 to, with tomorrow, with 10 to 6, and Saturday, 10 to 3, in front of the University Center.
Thank you.
Carolyn. Anything else someone would like to bring up? We have a new member here, okay. Thank you. Well, I would just want to let you know that we had 25 people at the end of the break. I did not think to look before, see how many Zoom people we had. But, and there were roughly 40 people here. We have a more exact count, but I just did a rough one. That's what we had here. We got to 34 on Zoom. Bridget, go ahead.
There's a question. Where is the Saturday, May 21st volunteer activity?
New Rich? Where's that? Gregory's? Where's that? Yeah, but the Zoom people didn't get the flyer. South of New Richmond on Highway 65. Oh, yeah? 1374 Highway 65, New Richmond, 1374. All righty. Well, thank you all for being with us on Zoom, and thank you all for being here in person. And we'll see you next month.